Anna Riati, good evening. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
To begin with, please walk us through the way UNICEF is perceiving the situation on the ground based on the information that you get from your representatives that have been there in Gaza since before this new war started.
Yeah. Thank you. We as UNICEF have had operations in the Gaza Strip for many years and decades. So we have a team based there that is there since the escalation of the conflict. So what we know is that the situation, the humanitarian situation, is dramatic, and the impact on children and women is terrible. I think the numbers of the reportedly killed people are well known. I think we are counting by the hour, and unfortunately the civilians population reportedly being killed is increasing. As of yesterday, we had about 9,000 people killed, out of which 4,000 were children.
We've passed 10,000 civilians, as the Hamas-run Ministry of Health is saying.
Exactly. And then we have, of course, a humanitarian situation. We have a water crisis in Gaza. The water facilities are working, according to what the team is saying, only as 5% of its capacity. We have a medical crisis because many hospitals have shut down. I think 1/3 of all the hospitals, 2/3 of all primary healthcare facilities. And then schools, of course, have also been damaged, so there's no school going on for kids. And we know that during emergencies is helping children to maintain some kind of normalcy, so that's over. And we're very worried about the reports that we get on the impact on children or on the trauma that this conflict is generating.
In the long run.
On the long run.
So, coming back to the numbers you were mentioning, there have been questions raised in the past few days regarding the accuracy of the death toll provided by the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. Do you trust those numbers? What is your previous experience with those numbers tell you about their accuracy and consistency with reality? Because there have been other conflicts, other periods of intense bombardments in Gaza, where the numbers provided then by the authorities proved to be real?
Look, according to our experience, including in previous emergency and conflicts in Gaza Strip, we are actually worried that the numbers will even be higher. You know, the Gaza Strip is a very highly populated territory. We have 2.2 million people living in Gaza. Half of it is children, so it's a huge percentage of children across the total population. So yes, indeed, these are reportedly killed and casualties that are usually verified in the course of a certain period. These are verified through, of course, the reports we get from media, but also from what we hear in the field. And as I said, given the total population of Gaza and the high number of children and women living there, I think we expect that the numbers might even be higher.
So you totally contradict President Biden, for example, who last week said that the numbers may be inflated.
No, I'm reporting what we hear from the humanitarian workers on the ground, and I think we will hear more about the numbers, maybe later.
Also, Israel is saying that Hamas is using civilians as human shields, children as well, and that they are hiding their bases in the proximity of schools, of hospitals, of refugee centers, all institutions with which UNICEF interacts, or has a direct relationship with. My question for you is, have your representatives on the ground ever seen something like that? Could they back these claims that Hamas is hiding their bases in the proximity of schools, for example? Have they had any indication of such things ever?
No, I mean, look, the situation is very challenging in the Gaza Strip now. What we are calling, and our position as the entire United Nations systems, and for sure UNICEF, is that anyway civilians must be protected, children must be protected, and this is also based on the international humanitarian law and human rights law. All civilian places like shelters, schools, hospitals, water facilities should always be protected. And unfortunately, what we see is that they have been targeted. I think our team on the ground, like all the other UN workers, are working under very difficult circumstances. Their work is, and their situation is similar to all the civilians living in Gaza. So their main preoccupation is also to keep alive, and we lost already many civilians. So under these circumstances, with the difficulties that you have in operating there, I think what is important is to call for the protection of civilians.
But they are targeted with this claim that in those places Hamas fighters, terrorists, as Israel calls them, are hiding. Is that a valid claim in the UNICEF's perception?
I don't think I can comment on this. I mean, what I can report on is about the humanitarian situation, is the importance for all parties to respect the humanitarian international law and human rights law.
What do you need from governments around the world right now in order for you to have better conditions to provide aid?
Thank you for asking that question. What we need is an immediate ceasefire. And so we need whoever can help with that to push for the immediate ceasefire. We need more humanitarian aid to come into Gaza. There has been a slight improvement, and so even UNICEF was able to get in some additional trucks. As of yesterday, 34 trucks full of supplies, of water, hygiene kits and supplies with medicines came in. I think we need that, and we need to continue to push for also whole people who are wounded or who really need immediate medical supports to be evacuated or be able to access medical support. And as I said, we need everybody to keep pushing for the respect by all parties of the international humanitarian law and protect all civilians, especially children.
There's barely any talk of ceasefire coming from the Western leaders. We've heard the demands for a ceasefire from the United Nations. The United States, on the other hand, firmly oppose a ceasefire right now. They call for humanitarian pauses, which are a different thing. Israel is opposing a ceasefire right now. And if there's any conversation about a ceasefire among the Western leaders, it always comes with conditions. We can have a ceasefire provided Hamas is releasing all the hostages. In your view, in UNICEF's view, are they interdependent, or do you need a ceasefire completely independent from the hostage situation?
Look, we have been calling for the release of all hostages. Of course, abduction of people, including children, is for us a grave violation of human rights, together with killing, together with maiming. So we have been calling for that as well. But what we need is a ceasefire, absolutely, to get the humanitarian aid in. There has been, at the end of October, a UN resolution by the General Assembly asking for the ceasefire, asking for also the release of all hostages, and we hope that we will get there. With negotiation, with advocacy, we really hope that ceasefire will allow the humanitarian support that the population in Gaza, civilians in Gaza, and children in Gaza, and women in Gaza need badly.
How do you see the fact that there's no real talk about a ceasefire among the Western leaders at this moment?
I'm hoping that there is an ongoing negotiation, and until the ceasefire happens, we will, as a United Nations system, continue to ask for it, because this is what we believe strongly we need at this point.
The situation in Gaza was dire even before this new war started. Could you help me with a comparison? How much aid was needed on a regular day before the 7th of October, and how much is getting in right now?
Well, as you said, for example, we know from working in there that the humanitarian needs were huge before. For example, on the psychosocial support for children, we know that around 1/3 of all children needed and were assessed to be in need of mental health and psychosocial support. So yes, there were needs before, and usually, and we had an appeal, and the United Nations had a plan of action that we usually do in coordination with all other aid workers. Now, of course, we have reassessed, we have done an immediate needs assessment, and we have called for an increased support of the humanitarian, for the humanitarian operations. So we will continue to assess, and I think the scale of the needs will only increase in the coming weeks and months. There has been support from our key donors, and including Romania. I know that Romania sent some aid to the border, but the problem is getting it in, and that's why we need a ceasefire, and that's why we need sustainable opening of the humanitarian aid to get in.
And in terms of food security, what was the situation before as compared to the way it is right now?
Yeah, the food security was an issue. As far as we know, for children, there was a lot of malnutrition in children before, and so this conflict can only worsen and elevate the situation.
Mm-hmm. The IDF is constantly asking civilians from northern Gaza to move to the southern part, which is deemed to be risk-free to civilians. Again, according to what your representatives tell you, representatives who are on the ground, is there any safe place in Gaza right now?
I don't think there is any safe place in Gaza now. I think the UN Secretary General has asked for take out this request because I think it's very difficult for people under this constant bombing to move from a place to another. So I think people are trying to find a safe place, even including in some of the UN agency for Palestinian refugee running schools, and some have indeed moved to the south of Gaza. But again, if there's no ceasefire and if this bombing continues, it's very difficult for people to determine safe places.
The UN has called Gaza these days a graveyard for children, unfortunately. It's dramatic. Do you perceive what's happening in Gaza right now as an indiscriminate collective punishment for civilians and for children alike?
As you say, the UN have defined the Gaza as a graveyard for children, especially because, as I said, 70% of all those killing, based on the estimate of the population, are children and women. So there is, an urgent need to stop this war and to, stop hitting civilians from being the main victims of this conflict.
Is it a collective punishment?
It's an attack that is having a huge impact on civilian infrastructures and people.
Are you expecting these kids that witness war right now, that are going to live with the consequences, to be, radicalized in the future? And if so, what can UNICEF, if there's anything UNICEF can do to prevent it?
As I said, I mean, we have been, since the beginning of the crisis, actually before the crisis and immediately after the escalation, scale up the support for psychosocial support. So we know that on the long term that we need to address the trauma in children. So it will have long-term consequences. We also know, though, from experience, that if children are provided with support, with the right psychosocial support, mental health support, they can regain their full life. So we know that we have a lot to do. And of course, UNICEF is there to support all of them, provided that this conflict stops.
I've seen pictures today from Gaza, from the very few Western outlets there are in Gaza right now, because journalists don't really have access there, and there have been like 70 journalists killed from the beginning of the conflict. I've seen pictures showing people carried with a donkey to the hospital, for example. From what your colleagues tell you on the ground, what are the most striking images and situations that they have encountered since the beginning of this war?
Look, there are many, and we are in touch with some of our staff, and one of the last, conversation that I can mention and I can share with you is actually one of our staff members who is trying, on one hand, to respond to a humanitarian crisis and helping the population. On the other hand, has two small children who, and she was telling us that their children were asking for some water. And the only thing that she could give at that time was some salty water, because, as I say, the desalination plants in Gaza are not working, or working at a very limited capacity. And she was telling us also that their children have started feeling the trauma and the consequences of this conflict. And for example, they were starting some self-harming practices. But she was telling us, now my focus is to keep them alive. And eventually, when this stops, maybe I can take care of their mental health and psychosocial support. I feel as a mother that this is something that you would never want to live or have your children live through.
Do you know anything about the kids that are taken hostages by Hamas in Gaza right now? Do you have any sort of implication in those conversations?
We know what of course, the Israeli authorities are saying. We know that amongst the 240 hostages, we have around 30 children. So, of course, we're very worried about them. As I mentioned, the abduction of children is considered a grave violation of human rights, and we have condemned this, and we have asked for immediate release of these children. Of course, in these situations, when we have abductions, it's very difficult to communicate about it, also for the protection of those who are hostages.
Let's say the war ends tomorrow, ends in a week. How do you envisage the plan for the reconstruction of Gaza, but not to the way it was before? What would you need in order to make Gaza a really livable place in which children live a happy childhood without restrictions and without scarcity of any kind?
Well, I hope we will get there very soon, that there will be a time for peace, whereby there can be an assessment of the damages and the plan put together by the international communities to deal with the urgent needs of reconstruction, of services for the population of Gaza, including health, water, education, psychosocial support for children, and that peace and security is restated as soon as possible in the Gaza Strip.
Thank you so much for joining the program, Anna Riati.
Thank you very much.